what does First Timothy 2:12 actually teach? That's kind of the harder one, I think, from these questions.
Mhm.
They get easier as they go.
Okay. So what 1 Timothy 2:12 teaches, and I'll pull up the text for me and read it. Um, I'll read from the NIV and the ESV just to illustrate some of the differences. ESV: I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, rather she is to remain quiet. The NIV says, I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man, she must be quiet. And so already we see two kind of issues there with how they interpret and translate a Greek verb. And this Greek verb, as I mentioned earlier, this is the only time it occurs in the New Testament. And so you have to kind of go outside the New Testament to other uses and find parallels. We need to, reading it on its own, it's like, okay, well, this doesn't tell us anything. It doesn't tell us enough to have a hard judgment on it. And the word is often kind of rare. It's not rare in the sense of, no one ever used it. It's just we don't have a lot of occurrences of it in kind of the time frame you want. You don't want to go 500 years that way or 500 years that way when talking about Greek words, just because language changes all the time. And there's even some evidence in the New Testament that language is already being played with and changing because language is weird, especially Greek. But what I think, and I could do a whole breakdown on this. I plan on doing a whole series on women in ministry on my YouTube channel. But for now, I think what the passage is getting at, read in context with the whole first chapter read as well, is Paul is correcting false teaching that is being perpetuated by, we might say, I don't like the phrase privileged, but entitled wealthy women. Paul is prohibiting entitled wealthy women from teaching in Ephesus. Because you'll notice no other epistle of Paul mentions anything like this, and the closest we have is 1 Corinthians 14, the two verses there. Without getting too technical, I think those two verses are probably a later addition into Paul's letter, what you would call an interpolation. For those who want more info on that, we can go into that in comments, or they can email me or tag me on something. We can go into that. But this is the only place where we have this sort of idea. And which tells us already that given the prominence of women elsewhere in all of the Pauline letters, workers, deacons, apostles, it tells us, okay, there's something going on here that's different than all these other places, all these other letters. And so that's why I use the language of in Ephesus, because there doesn't appear to be a comparable situation to other epistles or geographic locations. This wasn't the problem in Philippi. It wasn't the problem in Colossians or in Rome or in Corinth. And so I think what is happening here is you have the language of both of teaching and to do something, to assume authority or exercise authority. But if we go to Philo of Alexandria, and he's writing about 30 years, I can't remember if it's 30 years before or after Paul, so he's writing around Paul's time, which is really good. He uses the noun to describe the relationship between Cain and Abel. And what happened in that is, and I can read it for you. I published this article in the Canadian American Theological Review. I think that's what it was called. But I can actually pull it up. Where can I pull it up? I have it pulled up. Here we go. So he's talking. So what Philo does here is he's doing what's called pedagogy. He is using a biblical example to make a moral or philosophical point. Paul does that in Galatians 4 with Hagar and Jerusalem and all those sorts of things. So he's playing with that. So here you have the text. So therefore, and this is Philo. Therefore, anyone who loves oneself via the surname Cain, so you might think of the in Adam, in Christ idea. So in Cain would function like in Adam. So under that domain or way of thinking, must learn that he has slaughtered the namesake of Abel, his image, his individuality, the iconic image according to the type, not the archetype, not the family, not the outer form, which he expects to destroy, although they are living, immortal creatures. And so it's already complex language, and a lot of these words actually occur within 1 Timothy as well, teaching, and, so for example. But what he's getting at in a roundabout way is when you act in the function of Cain, when you act like Cain did, you are basically destroying the image not only of your fellow human, but of yourself. So it's sin as corrosion, as virus. And then he says, let anyone say to him, railing violently at him, Oh, what have you done, O evil genius? Do you not think to slay the one who loves God's glory, that you do not also dwell before God, that God doesn't see you, see what you've done? You have become a murderer of yourself, having slain by ambush the only ability you have to live a blameless life. And the word there that is found in 1 Timothy is murderer. You have become a murderer. You have basically slaughtered or slain by ambush the only ability you have to live a moral life. And he uses Cain killing Abel to indicate the destruction of that relationship and also the moral impact it has on a person. And if we take that parallel, and there's a lot of linguistic and theological parallels to the 1 Timothy passage, what you see here is the women have basically taken upon themselves the sovereign right to dictate and to boss and to overlord other people, which is something that's antithetical to literally everything I've said that Paul believes. Pneumatology, baptism, justification. That is not how things are meant to be functioning in the household of God, which tells us that it's not about women teaching, it's about women teaching in this sort of manner. Some people gloss it as usurp a man, but I think the idea is better of domineer or control, and control negatively. And so you have the language, I would translate it and understand it as saying, I am not permitting a woman or wife, it's the same Greek word, but I'm not permitting a woman or a wife to teach or to control her or control a man or her husband, same word. Rather, she is to be quiet. And so the whole point here is not on a universal prohibition on women doing anything in the church. It is addressing a very specific contextual reality by then appealing to Eve as one who's deceived, like these women are deceived. You've been deceived, and by the false teachers, literally he names them, the previous chapter, Hymenaeus and Alexander, and they've been kicked out of the church. The whole point is correction. You stop false teaching and heresy and the virus by stopping it from being perpetuated by the people speaking it. And so in this sense, I think you do have a real prohibition of women teaching, but he's prohibiting women from teaching false doctrine, which, last I checked, is good to do. You don't want anyone teaching false doctrine. Then he gives the idea of Adam was not the one deceived, which is true. Adam sinned willingly, so he's not giving Adam a pass here. But it was the woman who was deceived and became a sinner. So remember that Cain and Abel became a murderer. You've become something, indicating the shift in status and reality from one to another. But the women will be... Let's try that again. But women will be saved through childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. And so already the virtue list is meant to counteract the false teaching. It doesn't mean women can't teach, because women were teaching. It doesn't mean women can't have positions of leadership or authority or whatever, because they had those. What he's doing here is kind of what he did in Galatians. He's bringing in the narrative of Genesis 3 to make a point. But the point isn't on the subversion of women, it's on Christ. Because... not to get too technical. Well, actually, no, I won't get too technical. It'll just take too long, and I don't want to waste your time. But point being that what you have here is a temporary prohibition on women, entitled women in Ephesus, spreading false teaching. That is why he tells them to be quiet, and why he tells them in the verse right before in 1 Timothy 2:11, they must learn quietly with full submission. So the whole point is this is corrective behavior. Paul is correcting bad activities by women who have been influenced by the male false teachers. And so we could go into that a lot, but if we want to get too super technical, the only imperative in the passage, imperatival verb, you must do this, is to the women learning. The women must learn. So which already tells us that Paul's operating on a different level, because you don't teach women's education, all these sorts of things. So the whole point is, instead of teaching false doctrine, I want you to learn. And there is a Jewish axiom, is the student must learn before he or she becomes a teacher. So it doesn't even, even if you take the hard line that some people want to take, it doesn't rule out women becoming educated and therefore becoming ministerial leaders. They just can't do it right now because they've been seduced by false teaching, like Eve was seduced by false teaching. And I don't mean seduced like sexually, it just fell into it. So that's kind of my broad reading of the passage. I think that's what it actually says. I think it doesn't permanently exclude women from ministerial authority and leadership. I think it is a temporary ban on women exercising bad activities and bad attitudes by false teaching. And I think Paul says the same thing to men. In fact, I know he does because he kicked the men out in the previous chapter. He's handed them over to Satan. Whereas with the women, he's like, all right, let's have you learn, which tells us he thinks they're probably more victims than anything else. You don't teach people if they're doing horrific things and you think they can't be saved. Whereas with them, he's like, kick them out, hand them over to Satan so they might learn. So
Yeah.
that's very broad, very quick. If people have questions, they can message me and all that sort of stuff. But wanted to keep it as quick as possible because this passage it's complex. It's a highly complex passage, no matter how people slice it. But back to you.
Yeah, because everyone simplifies it pretty much to, well, the Bible clearly says this, and it's like, well, let's look into it because it's a letter, right? So we don't read letters like that. We don't, we would do better if we had both letters. What did the first person write to this person that's responding? What did this person know, right?
All right, that put a lot of New Testament people out of a job because we don't have to speculate and write dissertations on why this happened.
Yeah. And just as a woman, I think it's a temptation for us, especially with everything that we hear in our culture about how men are so evil, or maybe they have gone through some things that men have done that are evil.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a temptation for women, wives included, probably in the church too, of course, to want to rule over a man in the same way that they feel like, I don't want a man to rule over me.
Mm-hmm.
I want to rule the man. I want to tell
Right.
him what to do. I want to make all the decisions in my home.
Mm-hmm.
I think, like, to me, that kind of speaks also to that. Like, hey, it's not
Yeah.
about either a man ruling over a woman or a woman ruling over a man. That wouldn't make things right.
Mm-hmm. Now, I'm a big believer in shared leadership. So I think that's what Genesis straight up says: give them dominion over creation,
Hmm.
not over one another.
Yeah, because God made us, you know, uniquely different,
Mm-hmm.
and we both learn from each other,
Mm-hmm.
and we both help each other in different ways.